The night was buzzing with the kind of energy only a high school reunion could summon: nostalgia, laced with pride, insecurity, and silent competition. Former classmates gathered inside the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel, dressed to impress, carrying stories of survival, success, or sometimes quiet defeat. But beneath the surface of laughter and warm embraces, an undercurrent ran deep. Old hierarchies were itching to resurface, the pecking orders of adolescence longing for their encore. For some, high school had been the best days of their lives. For others, it was a battlefield of ridicule, a gauntlet where every day meant enduring whispers, stares, and laughter that cut deeper than fists ever could. Among those once deemed invisible, mocked, or discarded was a young black boy named Marcus Green. Back then, Marcus walked the halls with secondhand shoes and a quiet spirit. His notebooks, filled not with doodles or gossip, but with sketches of business ideas and calculations few bothered to understand. To his classmates, he was the class loser, the boy with hand-me-downs, the kid who sometimes skipped lunch because money at home was tight. But tonight, Marcus was not the same boy. What the world didn't know, what his classmates were utterly blind to, was that in the 5 years since graduation, Marcus had carved out a destiny that would make their shallow definitions of success crumble to dust. He wasn't just doing okay, he was worth more than $100 million, a self-made entrepreneur whose ideas had transformed industries. Yet in that ballroom of polished shoes and rented tuxedos, none of them had a clue. The invitation Marcus received weeks earlier hadn't been an act of kindness or reconciliation. It was carefully planned by Darius King, the self-proclaimed star of their high school class. Darius, tall, flashy, and arrogant, had been the ringleader of Marcus's tormentors. He was the kind of person who couldn't shine without dimming others. The kind of man who measured his worth by how many people laughed at his jokes, usually at someone else's expense. When Darius suggested inviting Marcus, his intent was clear: to mock the boy who had once been the butt of every cruel joke, to parade him before the class like an exhibit of failure. Y'all remember Marcus? Darius had laughed while planning the reunion with a few old friends. Man probably still working at some fast food joint, living in his mama's basement. Imagine the look on his face when he sees us rolling in with suits, nice cars, good jobs. This is going to be hilarious. The others chuckled, some nervously, others eagerly, falling back into their old rhythm of cruelty. For them, Marcus was still the same boy they remembered, the quiet one with skin too dark for their comfort, with dreams they couldn't see, with dignity they mistook for weakness. They wanted to remind him of where he stood in their imagined hierarchy. But fate, with its unshakable sense of irony, had written a different story. When Marcus walked into that ballroom, silence fell. At first, people didn't recognize him. His tailored suit was sleek, the kind of fabric that whispered wealth even before one touched it. His shoes gleamed under the chandelier light. His watch ticked with the precision of craftsmanship that cost more than some of their salaries combined. Marcus's posture radiated quiet strength. His confidence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable, the kind that comes from surviving storms and building empires in their wake. "Is that Marcus?" one of the women whispered, her voice carrying both shock and curiosity. Darius's smirk faltered for just a second before he forced it back into place. "Yeah, that's him," he said, his voice low, masking the irritation that his plan might not unfold the way he intended. "But don't be fooled. Money doesn't change who somebody really is. A loser stays a loser." Marcus saw him from across the room and their eyes locked. Memories rushed back like a tidal wave, the taunts, the laughter, the cruel pranks that left him humiliated in front of classrooms, the names they hurled that cut at the core of his identity as a young, black man struggling to find his place. He could have turned away. He could have ignored them, let time bury those scars. But tonight wasn't just about him. Tonight was about dignity reclaimed, about showing that the boy they tried to bury had grown into a man no one could diminish. He walked calmly, each step deliberate, commanding attention. Conversations hushed as people parted, making way without realizing why. There was something magnetic in his presence, something that made even those who didn't recognize his face straighten, their backs, and hold their breath. "Marcus Green," he said, extending his hand to Darius. His voice was smooth, deep, steady. Not a trace of the timid boy remained. Darius forced a laugh and shook it, squeezing harder than necessary as if to reassert control. "Man, look at you. I almost didn't recognize you. What you been up to? Working at some car dealership?" The crowd chuckled, expecting Marcus to shrink to play the part he once did. But Marcus didn't flinch. He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that held decades of unspoken truth. "Something like that," Marcus replied. His tone was calm, yet layered with something Darius couldn't place. The evening unfolded with drinks, speeches, and endless chatter. Former classmates compared careers, relationships, and possessions. Each story meant to impress. Yet, no matter how grand their tales, eyes kept drifting back to Marcus. He wasn't loud, he wasn't boastful, but his presence loomed larger than anyone else in the room. Whispers began circulating. Who was he? What did he do? Was he famous? Rich? Connected? The moment of revelation was inevitable, but Marcus didn't rush it. He let curiosity simmer, let the arrogance of his former bullies bubble to the surface as they tried, again and again, to make him the target of jokes that no longer landed. He listened, he observed, and when the time was right, he would speak not just for himself, but for every child who'd ever been ridiculed for dreaming beyond the limits others set for them. For Marcus knew something his classmates didn't. The tables had turned, and this time it was dignity, not cruelty, that would write the final chapter. The clinking of glasses filled the ballroom as the music softened, a sign that the speeches and announcements were about to begin. Old classmates, wrapped in nostalgia, huddled in small groups, comparing the versions of themselves they wanted others to see. Yet no matter the circle, no matter the chatter, the undercurrent remained the same. Marcus's presence was shifting the atmosphere. Darius, unwilling to surrender the spotlight he had clung to since his teenage years, sought desperately to reclaim control. He raised his glass and tapped the microphone, grinning wide as all eyes turned to him. His voice carried that same booming arrogance that once made him king of the hallways. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've all come. Look at us, grown, accomplished, thriving. And hey, even Marcus Green is here with us tonight." The crowd chuckled, some nervously, others eagerly, as if falling back into old habits. Darius smirked, his eyes gleaming with the cruelty of the past. "Now I know Marcus remembers when we used to joke around in high school. Man, this guy would sit in the corner with those tattered sneakers, scribbling in notebooks like he was planning world domination. We all thought he was drawing comic books or writing love letters to girls. He was too scared to talk to." Laughter erupted. Some laughed genuinely, others out of discomfort, while a few shifted in their seats, realizing the cruelty that once seemed harmless now carried the weight of shame. Marcus remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the table, his face betraying nothing. He'd learned long ago that dignity was its own defense. Darius leaned forward, his grin widening. "So, Marcus, tell us, what are you really doing these days? Don't keep us guessing, man. I bet you're, managing a gas station? Working in retail? No shame in that. Hard work's hard work." The room hushed, waiting for Marcus's reply. Some looked on with pity, others with anticipation. Marcus took a slow sip of water before speaking, his tone measured, almost gentle. "I'm doing all right," he said simply, offering no details. That response unsettled Darius more than any boast could have. It wasn't submission. It wasn't defensiveness. It was composure, quiet strength that didn't require validation. Darius forced another laugh. "Come on, man, don't be shy. People want to know. I mean, you showing up looking all sharp in that suit? Gotta admit, it's impressive. But you know what they say? Clothes don't make the man." Marcus smiled faintly, his gaze steady. "That's true. The man makes the clothes." A ripple of reaction passed through the room. Some gasped, others smirked at the subtle clapback. For the first time, Darius's confidence wavered. Still, he pressed on, unwilling to relinquish control. "Well, regardless, it's good you made it out tonight. High school wouldn't have been the same without you. You were, what do they call it? The comic relief." The cruelty disguised as humor landed with a thud this time. More people were shifting in their seats, aware that the jokes were falling flat. A few glanced at Marcus, waiting for an explosion, a bitter retort, something. But Marcus didn't flinch. He'd mastered patience, and tonight, patience was his weapon. As the evening wore on, smaller conversations resumed. A group of women who once whispered about Marcus's dark skin and thrift store clothes now found themselves drawn to him. "Marcus, you've changed so much," one of them said, her tone carrying a mix of admiration and regret. "You carry yourself differently. What's your secret?" "Survival," Marcus replied softly. "And faith. Life has a way of teaching you that dignity is worth more than anyone's opinion. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. For some, they struck a chord. For others, they stung with the realization that their laughter once tried to strip that dignity away. At the bar, two of Darius's old friends whispered, "Yo, I don't know what Marcus has been up to, but he's not the same. You see that watch? That's not no knockoff. Dude's carrying real money." "Man, stop playing," the other replied. "Marcus? The same Marcus we used to clown for not having bus fare? Nah, he probably borrowed it or something." But doubt had been planted, and it grew quickly. Everywhere Marcus walked, eyes followed, questions whispered, curiosity spread. Who was he really? Eventually, the host announced a tradition of the reunion, an open mic where people could share stories, updates, or words of inspiration. Darius, still clinging to his role, stepped up first. "High school was the best time of my life," he boasted. "I was captain of the basketball team, class president, prom king, you name it, I did it. And since then I've been doing just fine. Got a decent job, good car, couple of investments on the side. But tonight ain't about me, it's about us. So let's celebrate." Polite applause followed, though not with the enthusiasm he expected. When the microphone was passed around, a few others spoke, sharing tales of family, careers, or lessons learned. Then almost inevitably the mic reached Marcus. All eyes turned to him, anticipation sharp in the air. For the first time that evening, Marcus rose to his feet. His presence commanded silence before he spoke a single word. He held the microphone gently, his gaze sweeping across the faces that once laughed at him, doubted him, tried to diminish him. "I wasn't sure I'd come tonight," he began, his voice calm but strong. "High school wasn't easy for me. Some of you might remember. For a long time I carried the weight of those years. The names, the laughter, the isolation. I wondered if I'd ever be more than the kid people called a loser. But life has a way of turning pain into purpose." The room was silent, every word striking deeper than the last. "I learned to build when people tried to tear me down. I learned to dream when people told me I wasn't enough. And in the years since graduation, I discovered that the same boy you laughed at was capable of more than any of us imagined." Gasps echoed as the first crack of truth slipped through. Darius shifted in his chair, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Marcus continued, his tone unshaken. "I didn't come here to boast. I came here to show that no matter what people say, no matter how small they make you feel, dignity is not something they can take from you. It's something you carry even when no one else sees it." The words hung heavy, the air charged with the realization that the tables had begun to turn. Marcus hadn't revealed the full extent of his success, not yet. But the seed was planted, and the power dynamics in the room had shifted forever. For the first time all night, Darius was quiet. And for the first time in years, Marcus's voice carried more weight than the laughter that once tried to silence him. When Marcus finished speaking, the room held a hush so profound it felt like time itself had paused. His words had carried a weight that no amount of bravado could counter. A gravity born not from bitterness, but from hard-won resilience. For many in the room, it was the first time they'd ever truly heard his voice. Not the voice of the quiet kid in the back of the classroom, but the voice of a man who had weathered storms and come out stronger. The applause started softly, hesitant at first. Then it grew louder, longer, until it filled the ballroom. People weren't clapping just for Marcus. They were clapping for what he represented, for every overlooked soul who had ever been underestimated. But not everyone was moved. At a table near the front, Darius sat stiffly, his smile strained. He forced himself to clap, but the sound was hollow, the gesture mechanical. Deep down, he felt the grip of something he had never allowed himself to feel toward Marcus. Fear. Still, arrogance dies hard. The moment the microphone returned to its stand, Darius leaned back and muttered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Talk's a good game, but words don't pay bills." He laughed at his own remark, though fewer joined him this time. Marcus returned to his seat unbothered, sipping his water with quiet composure. But he knew what was coming, the curiosity, the questions, the probing eyes. He had allowed them to underestimate him one final time, and now truth would do the rest. It started with the whispers. At the bar, a man in a gray suit pulled out his phone and began typing furiously, searching Marcus's name. Within seconds, his eyes widened. "Yo," he muttered to the friend beside him. "This can't be right. Is this him? Marcus Green, the CEO of Next Phase Technologies?" The friend leaned over, squinting at the screen. "No way, that's some other Marcus." Ain't no way our Marcus, he stopped mid-sentence, his jaw dropping. Bruh, it's him. Look at the picture. Same face, just sharper. They scrolled quickly, their voices trembling with disbelief. Forbes list. Black Enterprise cover. Bro, this man is worth over $100 million. The word spread like wildfire. In minutes it rippled through the ballroom. Mouths whispering. Eyes darting toward Marcus with shock, envy, awe. At one table, a woman who once rolled her eyes whenever Marcus tried to speak in class now whispered, I can't believe it. I used to ignore his invitations to group projects. Now he's richer than everyone in this room combined. Another man who once tripped Marcus in the hallway for laughs whispered under his breath, Man, I knew he was up to something, I just didn't know it was this big. The realization hit harder than any punchline. The boy they dismissed had rewritten the narrative, and none of them had seen it coming. Meanwhile, Darius tried desperately to maintain his composure. He chuckled nervously, dismissing the murmurs as exaggerations. Come on, y'all. Don't believe everything you see on Google. Anybody can make a website, post a picture, claim to be rich. Trust me, Marcus is the same as he's always been. But the truth refused to be buried. One of the reunion organizers, curious and emboldened, approached Marcus with a microphone in hand. Marcus, she said, her voice tinged with both awe and excitement. There's a lot of talk in the room. People are saying you've built a company that's changed the game in technology. Would you like to tell us a little more about that? The room went silent again. Every pair of eyes locked on Marcus. This was the moment. Marcus set his glass down, stood slowly, and adjusted his cufflinks. He hadn't planned on sharing his story in full tonight, but he saw the anticipation, the hunger, the need not for gossip, but for truth, for dignity, for vindication. I didn't want to turn this reunion into a business seminar. He began, his voice calm, steady. But since you ask, yes, I'm Marcus Green, founder and CEO of Next Phase Technologies. We build sustainable energy solutions and digital infrastructure for communities that corporations forgot. In 5 years, we've expanded across 3 continents, partnered with governments, and employed thousands of people. We've taken neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, places written off as hopeless, and given them opportunities to thrive. And by God's grace, yes, it's been successful. The room erupted, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in stunned silence, broken by gasps and whispers. Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. You called me a loser once. Some of you laughed when I came to school with the same shoes every day. Some of you made me feel invisible. But I learned something valuable in those years. I learned that rejection is fuel, that humiliation can be a teacher, and that faith in yourself is the one currency no one can strip from you. His words pierced deeper than any insult ever could. For some, shame burned in their chests. For others, admiration replaced old prejudices. From the corner of his eye, Marcus caught Darius fidgeting, his face tight with barely concealed rage. For years, Darius had built his identity on being the one who stood tallest in the room. Tonight, that illusion shattered, replaced by the undeniable presence of the man he once mocked. A woman stood and clapped, tears in her eyes. Soon others followed. The applause grew, rolling like thunder through the ballroom. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite, it was raw, genuine, uncontainable. But not everyone could celebrate. At the bar, Darius's voice cut through the applause, sharp and bitter. Y'all acting like he cured cancer or something. Don't get me wrong, Marcus, congrats and all. But money don't change the fact that in high school, you were still the butt of every joke. Let's not rewrite history. The applause faltered and tension thickened in the air once more. All eyes turned back to Marcus, waiting for his response. Marcus didn't rush. He turned slowly toward Darius, his expression composed, unshaken. Then, with a calmness that silenced even the whispers, he said, You're right, Darius. Money doesn't change history, but history doesn't define destiny. You tried to make me a joke. Tonight, the only punchline is how wrong you were. The room erupted again, this time in a mix of applause, cheers, and gasps. For the first time in his life, Darius found himself on the other side of laughter, the target of a truth so undeniable that even his arrogance couldn't shield him. And Marcus, standing tall in the center of it all, knew this was only the beginning of his reckoning with the past. The applause thundered in Marcus's ears, not as noise, but as vindication. For the first time in years, those who once dismissed him were forced to see him, not as a target, not as a shadow but as a man whose presence commanded respect. Yet across the room, Darius's face was tight with resentment, his pride bleeding in front of an audience he'd once controlled. He could feel the attention slipping from him, the invisible crown of class king sliding off his head. And for a man like Darius, humiliation was unbearable. He slammed his glass down on the table, rising abruptly. "Enough!" he barked, the word echoing louder than he intended. Conversation's hushed eyes snapped toward him. His jaw clenched as he pointed toward Marcus. "Don't sit here acting like you're some hero. You got lucky, that's all. Some rich investor probably handed you a check and made you look good. Money doesn't erase the fact that you were a nobody. And deep down you still are." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Others exchanged uneasy glances, ashamed by the venom but unwilling to intervene. Marcus didn't move. His face was calm, his body language measured, as though Darius's words barely grazed him. But inside, Marcus remembered every day he walked home hungry. Every time he was mocked for being black, in a school that treated his skin like a stain. He remembered how teachers sometimes overlooked his raised hand, how security guards eyed him more than his classmates, how even excellence was not enough to earn respect. He took a slow breath, stood, and met Darius's glare with a steady gaze. "You see, Darius," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "What you call luck, I call faith and work. What you call being a nobody, I call surviving a world designed to make people like me disappear." The silence grew heavier. Marcus's voice deepened, firm yet steady, his words woven with memory and fire. "You think the worst thing you did was laugh at me in class? Or trip me in the hallway? But the truth is the damage ran deeper. You laughed at my skin, my clothes, my dreams. You laughed because I didn't have what you had. And in a country where a black boy is already taught he's less than. Your cruelty wasn't just childish, it was dangerous. You tried to make me believe that I didn't matter. And I almost did." The room froze. Even those who once laughed with Darius now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, they were being forced to confront the ugliness of their silence, their complicity. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly. "You didn't break me. You prepared me. Every insult you threw, every door that was slammed in my face. Every day I walked to school with holes in my shoes. It taught me resilience. It taught me to fight harder. And now the boy you mocked is a man who owns his destiny." He paused, scanning the room, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I built what I built not just for myself, but for the kids still growing up like I did. The ones sitting in classrooms right now, afraid to raise their hand because someone like you might laugh. The ones who feel invisible because their skin doesn't fit into someone else's idea of beauty. I built this so they'd know they're not invisible. They're not worthless. They matter." The crowd erupted into applause again, this time louder, some even standing on their feet. Tears streaked down faces, some from shame, others from admiration. But Darius, humiliated, refused to sit down. His voice cracked as he shouted above the noise. "You think you're better than us? You think your money makes you a saint? Please. You can dress it up, you can give speeches, but you'll always be that same kid, pathetic, desperate, nothing but a fraud." This time the laughter didn't follow. Instead, the silence that met him was suffocating. Even his old friends looked away, ashamed. Marcus tilted his head slightly, regarding Darius with a calm that cut sharper than any insult. "No, Darius," he said softly, but with power in every syllable. "I don't think I'm better than you. I just know I'm not less." The words landed like a hammer. Darius's bravado shattered, his face paling as he realized he no longer had an audience. He was exposed, stripped of the power that once made him untouchable. A woman near the back stood suddenly, her voice trembling. "Marcus, I need to say this. I was one of the ones who laughed back then. I didn't think about what it meant. I didn't think about how much it hurt. And I'm sorry." Her words cracked the dam. One by one, classmates began speaking. "I joined in too," another admitted. "I thought it was harmless, but I see now it wasn't. I should have stood up for you," a man confessed, his voice breaking. "I didn't, and I regret it." Marcus listened, not with anger but with a solemn grace. He nodded slowly, acknowledging their words. "I don't need apologies," he said. "What I needed back then was respect. But if you've learned something tonight, if you walk out of here and treat the next Marcus Green in your life differently, then maybe it wasn't in vain." The room was still. Many lowered their heads, humbled by his truth. Others clapped again, not just for Marcus's success, but for his strength of character, his refusal to be poisoned by bitterness. Darius sank into his chair, defeated, his voice swallowed by the weight of his own irrelevance. For years he had thrived on being the loudest in the room. Tonight, silence was louder than anything he could say. Marcus, meanwhile, stood tall in the center of it all, not because of his wealth, not because of the applause, but because he had finally reclaimed his dignity from the hands that once tried to crush it. The night was no longer about high school memories. It was about something greater, the victory of resilience, the justice of transformation, and the undeniable truth that no one, not cruelty, not prejudice, not arrogance, could define Marcus Green's worth but Marcus himself. And as the evening pressed on, it became clear that the reunion would be remembered not for Darius's antics, but for the moment a man once dismissed as a loser showed an entire room what true greatness looked like. The night wound on, but nothing could overshadow what had just taken place. The energy in the ballroom had shifted. The laughter that once thrived on cruelty had been replaced with reflection, humility, even reverence. Marcus sat back at his table, the weight of years lifted from his shoulders. For once he wasn't the boy. Shrinking into the shadows, he was the man, whose very presence forced others to confront themselves. Around him, classmates approached in small groups, their voices tentative. "Marcus," one said softly, "I run a mentorship program now. I want to bring your story to the kids I work with. They need to hear it." Another added, "My son's been struggling in school. Teachers write him off because he's quiet, because he doesn't fit their mold. Tonight reminded me I can't let him slip through the cracks." Each confession wasn't about them, it was about what Marcus had awakened. He didn't smile in triumph, didn't bask in glory. He simply nodded, accepting their words with the grace of someone who had no desire for revenge. His victory wasn't about making them feel small. It was about never letting himself feel small again. Meanwhile, Darius sat at his table, silent, isolated. The once loud laughter that followed him wherever he went had vanished. His friends avoided his gaze, embarrassed by his outburst. In his glassy eyes was the look of a man realizing that power built on arrogance is fragile, and when stripped away leaves nothing. Eventually, Marcus rose to leave. As he walked toward the door, conversations quieted, eyes following him, not with mockery but with respect. The kind of respect he had long deserved. Halfway to the exit, a voice called out, "Marcus." It was Darius. His tone lacked the edge it once carried. Instead, it trembled with something unfamiliar, vulnerability. Marcus turned slowly, his face unreadable. Darius stammered, searching for words. "I don't know how to say this. Maybe there's no way to, but I was wrong. Back then tonight, I was wrong." His voice cracked. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it." The room held its breath, waiting for Marcus's reply. He studied Darius for a long moment. In that instant, he saw not the bully who tormented him, but a man undone by his own emptiness. Marcus could have lashed out, could have seized the moment to wound him with the same cruelty he had endured, but that wasn't who Marcus had become. "I don't hate you, Darius," Marcus said finally, his voice calm, steady. "I outgrew you. That's all." The words cut sharper than anger ever could, because they revealed the truth. Darius no longer defined anything about Marcus's life. With that, Marcus turned and walked out. The night air outside was cool, carrying with it the hum of the city. Marcus paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the skyline, lights glittering against the darkness, symbols of both struggle and triumph. He thought about the boy he used to be, walking these same streets with empty pockets but a heart full of dreams. He thought about his mother, who told him every night, "Baby, don't let this world tell you who you are. You tell it who you are." Tears stung his eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. She had believed when no one else did. She had seen him before the world ever did. And tonight, her words rang louder than ever. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened a message thread titled Mom. His fingers hovered over the screen, then typed, "Made it through the reunion. You were right, Ma, the world sees me now. But you saw me first." He hit send, slipping the phone back into his pocket as a quiet smile spread across his face. Inside the ballroom, the classmates were still buzzing. Conversation shifted from shallow reminiscing to deeper reflection. They realized the night hadn't been about old memories, it had been about reckoning. About confronting who they were, who they had become, and who they still had the chance to be. One woman sitting quietly at her table whispered to her friend, "I think we just witnessed something holy tonight. Like a man taking back his name." Her friend nodded, "And maybe giving us a chance to take back ours." The story of the reunion would ripple outward. It would be told in living rooms, at dinner tables, and classrooms. Marcus Green's name would no longer be tied to mockery, but to triumph, dignity, and justice. And in every retelling, the lesson would remain the same. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never mistake poverty for weakness. Never mistake silence for emptiness, because sometimes the ones you call losers are the very ones destined to lead. Marcus stepped into his car, the city lights reflecting in the window as it pulled away. He didn't look back, not at the building, not at the people inside. The reunion wasn't about them anymore. It was about him, about closing a chapter that no longer held him prisoner. He had walked into that ballroom carrying the weight of the past. He left it lighter, freer, stronger. And as the car moved through the city streets, Marcus thought not of the mockery he had endured, but of the children who still faced it every day. He thought of the young black boys and girls told they were too loud, too quiet, too poor, too dark, too different. He thought of how many of them were being crushed under the same laughter that once followed him. That night Marcus made a vow. His fortune wouldn't just be a symbol of survival, it would be a weapon for change. Scholarships, schools, mentorship programs, he would expand them all. Because dignity wasn't his alone to reclaim. It belonged to every child who had been made to feel small. The city blurred past the window, but Marcus's vision was clear. He had turned his pain into power, his silence into a voice that could no longer be ignored, and now he would make sure the world listened. In the end, the reunion wasn't remembered for the jokes, the music, or the food. It was remembered for the night. A man once called a loser walked into a room full of doubters and walked out a giant. It was remembered for the way his presence forced others to reckon with the past, and for the way he showed them that true wealth is not only measured in millions, but in dignity, courage, and the ability to rise when the world tried to keep you down. Marcus Green's story became more than a memory. It became a testament, a reminder, a beacon, and for every person who had ever been mocked, overlooked, or underestimated, his life whispered the same unshakable truth. You are not who they say you are. You are who you decide to become.